Good morning. This is, of course, Coffee and Jesus, and today's, I'm a little early. I know, it's Good Friday, um, but today is what we as Christians celebrate as, excuse me, the death of the crucifixion, death of Jesus. And there was, I don't know, a few months ago, I was just kind of looking around on the internet and was kind of a little upset that most of what we see, and I understand why, but most of what we see for uh, accounts of Jesus' death and the scourge and the beating that he received and the crucifixion, we have to PG it because, it's graphic and, it's something that we just don't want our kids to see or people who are, well, too bad. Too bad. I'm going to try to explain a little bit about what happened from the accounts I have from medical doctors. So it's not just me. It's not being a Christian fanatic, although I am. But this is from medical doctors who have, of course, there was only one who would have been there, and that's Luke. But this is from people who are medical doctors, as I've said, and who have studied Roman and how Romans would scourge and beat people and then crucify them and what that would have done to a human body. So we're getting this from a few doctors as I looked it up on the internet, read through a few articles and things like that. So we're going to get started. The first thing is of course, Friday, this Good Friday, was a very stressful day, including Thursday, the night before, when Judas betrayed Jesus. Now, from what I understand, I just heard about today that there's a belief out there, or a following, let's just call it stupidity, of a lot of things that people just don't read the Bible about. They hear something and, oh, it's got to be true. Or even if my pastor said it's got to be true, that doesn't make it true. Read your Bible. Get more than one opinion on something. But there's a belief that Jesus was crucified because of the actions of Judas Iscariot. It's not true. Some say that that's because, when he dipped his bread at the same time, excuse me, or he broke the bread or whatever, and was giving it out to his disciples, that he said the one who dips his bread with me at the same time is the one who will betray me, that he didn't understand what was in the betrayal. That's not true. Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen through this whole process. Part of that is the fact that when he was in the garden and was praying to his Father, that he actually said, is there any way that this can pass from me? It wasn't that he didn't want to do this, but he knew the physical labor, or the physical beating he was going to receive. He knew about the crucifixion. He wasn't stupid. He knew these things and how they would happen and what would happen. So in this whole thing that we're going to go through here, he was not a victim of Judas. Don't believe that if you hear that. I had just heard about it today. My wife had told me about it, that there's a belief out there, I guess, that there was he was a victim of Judas. Jesus Christ was not a victim. I don't care what you say, what you believe, what you think. He was not a victim. He did this on his own. He came. We know that John 3:16 said that God loved the world so much that he sent his son to do this. And God didn't want to live without us. And so not wanting to live without us was the reason that he came. And sin is the problem. And sin separates us. I've heard people say, why would a loving, here we go, air quotes, loving God send anyone to hell? God doesn't send anyone to hell. You send yourself. Get over yourself. Get over the fact that you think you're important in the universe. Because you're not. Jesus had to come and die for the sins of the world. You, me, everyone. And those sins are what separate us from God. And so Jesus became that gap. So here we go. So on the physical death of Jesus Christ, you can look up article after article after article. You just type in physical death of Jesus, and there's many out there. But it's pretty graphic. If you have not seen Passion of the Christ, I suggest you do. Even Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus, in that movie said that, of course he wore on his back because they wanted to make it look as real as possible. Of course, Mel Gibson was the director. He wanted to make it as real as possible. The real sounds, they used the real fledgling. I think I said that right, but that's the whip. They used something that was, known at that time to be it. And so let me explain that out to you. The whip, of course, had a nice leather handle on it. And it was either one or two. It depends on the situation. It could have been one person who would whip or two people, all depending on how it was. There's a couple of different thoughts on how it was. That everything I'm seeing is that they were stripped naked, of course. So there's one of the things that, in front of people. This wasn't done in private. This was done in a public square. But it would have been embarrassing that way for whoever was getting beaten. That's part of the purpose of this. Let's remember, it's also a mental thing that they're trying to break down of whoever's getting beaten and whipped. By the way, it was supposed to be for the worst of the criminals. Jesus didn't do anything wrong. So anyway, that they would have either been splayed up with, naked with their arms above their head and attached to something so it would open up their back. Or from what I think had happened was they were kind of laid across a beam or something like that. Their hands tied either to their feet or their hands tied to the ground, their feet down and tied down. So their back was just splayed open. And you would have had either one or two people who would whip them. Now, in churches and stuff we saw from Hollywood up until the Passion of the Christ, you'd see a few, you'd see them do the whipping or whatever, and they'd kind of flash at the back or whatever, and you'd see some marks across there with some blood in it. Bull. That's not what happened. Everything that I read here on the internet from doctors and the way that this would have worked was this whip would have little metal balls. A couple of the things that was for was one, it would provide weight so that when they were whipping, it wasn't just a light leather, which would hurt. Yes, it would cut skin, but it would provide the weight needed. And when it hit, the first hits would bruise. The first hit would hit hard and it would bruise skin and bruise muscle. And then as they pulled back and they hit again, that would end up breaking the skin and driving deep into there. Also, they would say there's a couple of things that there was either small bits of metal or there was sheep bone, things like that would take, excuse me, my dogs are, hey, easy. Sorry, everybody. They decided to jump and fight real quick. They usually don't do that so much. Anyway, so part of what was, going on with that was the fact that these bones would rip and tear, and that was the whole purpose of this. So these metal balls and the bones would rip and tear and rip flesh. And nobody knows how many strikes Jesus took. It's said that 40 would kill somebody. So the Jewish law said that you would get 39, just so that you wouldn't have to be killed by that. So the crucifixion could happen. So we're gonna, have to assume that there was 38, 39 lashes or whatever that was given. Now, when this happened was these bone and the metal would take and rip flesh apart. The first hit would have been so excruciating that would just, I don't know, the screaming that I can imagine Jesus had to give out for the fact that he was being beaten and hit with this would have been just, I can't imagine what it would be. So in this, though, that they did this so much, excuse the pup, she's a good one. They did this so many times on him that it would actually rip the flesh off. That there was, when they would whip it back, that if there was people behind or a wall or whatever, bits of flesh and blood would be on that. Also, the person whipping would be covered with their flesh and blood. So they whipped Jesus, and these little balls of metal and these bone or metal pieces would just rip into the flesh all the way to the bone. We're talking open. You would have seen ribs. You'd have seen backbone. I'm pretty sure that the bone would have had, tear marks on the bones and things like that. Also, they didn't care. they would do it so much that it would probably reach around to the front and rip open. It would hit up near their face, their legs. So when they were talking about Jesus having to carry his cross and that he fell and couldn't carry it, there's a reason. Okay? We're not just talking that he got a few lashes with leather that cut his back. They ripped him to shreds. He was bleeding. There was shreds of skin just falling off of him and hanging there. And not only that, when they were done with that, they picked him up, or they untied him, however it was, and they threw a robe on him to mock him as the king of the Jews. So now, as they're mocking him, which, they're punching him, they're telling him to, hey, before this beating happened, they blindfolded him, they'd hit him, pull his beard, pull his hair, slap him, things like that. And it wasn't just no, they were hitting as hard as they could because they hated him. So now the beating's done. He's got flesh being ripped all off of his body, front, back, the back especially was just, you wouldn't have been able to tell it was somebody's back. If you saw a picture of it, you'd have just seen a bloody mess. You'd have seen some skin. You'd have seen bone, ribs, things like that. His body probably was starting to have trouble breathing at this point. And at any time, which I'll mention this again, at any time, Jesus could have stopped this. So for people to say that, I don't know what they would say. He had to have been a lunatic if he wasn't Lord. Because to go through all this stuff is, no. I wouldn't have done it. Not at all. So anyway, they put this robe on him, and immediately, if you know anything about medicine, medical stuff, you know that when you start to put anything on any kind of wound, it starts to congeal. It starts to heal just a little bit. So they would have put that on him and gave him the cross to carry. Now, I've grown up in church, and I've seen them where they've got the full cross. It's over his shoulder. I don't think that's how it worked. There's usually a beam laid on the ground in Golgotha where they would put them up on the hill. But the cross beam, whether it went as a cross as we know it, or whether it was at the top, kind of like a T, we don't know exactly, or whether it was the cross. I know we celebrate the cross, but it could have been up the top too. But anyway, either way, it would have been the beam that he would have had to carry. And from the research that I've done on the computer, it seems like most of this research says that it was about 80 to 100 pounds. Jesus himself was not a big person. In general, the Jewish people were, anywhere from 5'5", 5'8" at the tallest, things like that. They weren't real large built people. So a crossbeam of 80 to 100 pounds would have been hard for any of them to carry, let alone having just been beaten. So this robe was starting to congeal on him, and he had to start carrying it. Of course, he dropped it. He was probably stumbling a lot, and they were so nice about it. No, they were probably kicking him and hitting him, whipping him some more, trying to get him to move. And then Simon of Cyrene was just pulled from the crowd. Could you imagine? You're there. You might have just walked up to say, hey, what the heck is going on around here? And a Roman soldier grabs you and tells you to carry this thing. So Jesus stumbles and kind of falls on his way up there, and nobody's going to help him. So they take and get him up there to where they're preparing him, and they grab this robe and they rip it off of his body, and that opens up everything else. And I'm sure that was very painful as well. At this time, I'm not sure that I'd have kept going. No, I wouldn't have let him whip me once. I'd have been like, I'm done. No, you're not doing this to me. By the way, Jim Caviezel, I had mentioned it earlier that during the fake whip that he received, they put a board or over him, and they were whipping him that way. And he said that they used what they felt was an authentic flagellum whip, and one of the pieces of leather came over the protection that he had, and it hit him in the ribs. And he said it hit so hard that it knocked the breath out of him, and it bruised him. And I believe he said it actually cut him during that. The cut may not have happened, but I know he said that it hit so hard it knocked the breath out of him. And he couldn't imagine sitting there taking 39 of those and without protection. So the pain of this had to have been excruciating. So now we're at the cross, and they ripped the robe off of him. They took a crown of thorns, which I've seen, and people just kind of in Hollywood just kind of, oh, let's just put this on there. No, these had thorns from history. It says that they were usually 2 to 3 inches long. The person who fashioned it into it, twisted it together, would have had to have probably had gloves of some sort, just so that they could have been able to work with it. And then they wouldn't have just placed it on his head. They rammed that into his head and pushed it down hard to where it would have cut underneath his skin, pushed up against his eyes, anywhere around, and just would have shoved it on his head really hard. So that would have done it. There's a connotation to that when that goes back to the very beginning of the Bible, when God kicked Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden and told them they had to work the land, and the land was covered with thorns as a curse. So skip forward a few thousand years, or a couple thousand years, and Christ is being crucified on the cross, and somebody had taken thorns and put it on his head to show that he's wearing our curse. So anyway, they do that. They lay him down, which I'm pretty sure any movement at this time was excruciating pain. And they said that they put it through his hands and his feet, the nails. Now, even as a kid, when I was growing up, I knew that by just even feeling my hands, they couldn't have put it through his hand. Plus, in medical, even today, the wrist is considered part of the hand. And if you check, even on yourself, if you're watching, go ahead and check. Excuse me. You can see and feel that there's a spot right between your two bones, right where your wrist is at, that there's an area right there that something could be pierced through. So they would have done that and put that through, and they knew the Romans didn't invent crucifixion, but they perfected it. And they perfected it to a point where it'd be the most excruciating pain that you could do. So they would have taken a nail. They said 7, 8 inches. I know on your screen this isn't 7 or 8 inches, but 7 or 8 inches long, and would have laid his hand out, probably held it out, and just jammed it through. Now that would have broke tendons and things like that. The Bible does say that Jesus never had a bone broken, but that would have went through and tore tendons and been just very excruciating pain through all that. If you push a little bit on that area, that's painful just to push. I can't imagine a nail done on one side and a nail done on the other. Then on his foot, there's a couple of different thoughts on that, that it went between a couple of his toes there in his foot, and they would have pushed stuff aside. I'm not sure, but if you go all the way to the back of your foot, up near where your ankle and your leg meet, again, there's another little hole like that where the bones go through. It's a thought that has went through there, but they believe also that one foot would have been on top of the other, and they'd have driven a nail straight through both of those, with his knees being bent. The reason for that is so that anytime he tried to breathe, he'd have to push up and pull, which again was excruciating pain, and his back being flayed open, and some of that, around on his ribs, and now this crown of thorns and all this pain that he suffered for you and for me, because he loved us. I'm sorry, but my girl likes to cuddle. Because he loved us, and because he wanted to be with us. He didn't want heaven without us. And this is that part where, like, one of my songs that I really like, I'm trying to remember the artist. The name of the song is He's Crazy About You. It's very true. He loved us so much. There was some stuff out of years ago about a message that was called, I'm going to bring it a little closer, a message that was called Lunatic, Liar, or Lord. And I looked up some of that, and I'd have to agree that Jesus was either a lunatic because to go through, to go through what he went through just to claim that he was Christ, it doesn't even make sense. The first hit of that whip, or the first punch from somebody, to sit there and say, oh, I'm going to do this, and then even be crucified on a cross in such a brutal way and have such a brutal beating, was stupid. That would have been lunatic. Maybe he was a liar, but to hold a lie that long and go through all that doesn't make any sense either. Or he was Lord. And, Jesus was physical as much as we are, but he was also Lord, and he knew that it would be brutal. He knew that he was going to have to endure so much pain and things like that, even to a point of his own father turning his back on him. There's a lot of speculation about that. Let's just keep it simple. When he looked into heaven and saw that was the sin of the world was placed upon Christ at that time, and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you turned your back on me? And it wasn't a question of who God was. It just, Jesus was close to dying, and he and his Father have such a close relationship that the mental health side of things, that Christ still had this relationship with his Father, was able to look in there, but God cannot look upon sin. And so Christ took our sin for us. He became sin. And then the message I've preached before, the three greatest words you could ever hear, it is finished. He paid for that. He paid for the sin of the world through all this pain and suffering that he went through. 3 hours, they say that was, he was on the cross, some say it was 3, before he died. And it was taken down, put into a grave. And then, as we know, on Sunday, 3 days from today, he got up out that grave, baby. There is historical fact. People say, well, you can't prove that, you can't prove that. Well, the crucifixion of Christ and what had happened to him was written by eyewitness accounts. Now, unless you want to figure out a way to discredit those eyewitnesses, even those who weren't his followers, the Roman soldier, when Christ died, said, truly, this had to be the Son of God. But eyewitness account is generally, and I've never heard it otherwise unless they can have that eyewitness there to disprove them with fact. And we can't do that, so we have to take it as fact. And, people say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all had different accounts of it. Well, yeah, duh. When I was a corrections officer, myself and a couple of my other officers would go and respond to something. However we acted, or however the situation was, we all would go in, we'd react, we'd take care of the situation. We came back, we had to write a report. We weren't legally allowed to talk about what we were going to write in that report to one another. So we had to come back, immediately sit down, and write our report. Now, are you going to get 4 different reports if 4 of us showed up? Yes. But is the same narrative going to be the same through all of it? Yes. I see things different than a fellow officer, or I see things different than you do. You and I could be in the same situation, bad situation, good situation, whatever it is. And we could be talking to the media, we could be talking to anybody or anything about it, and have 2 different perspectives of the same event. So that's where Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John vary a little bit, but they see it in a different connotation. So we have actual historical proof that not only Jesus walked on the earth, but that he was also crucified and died on the cross in this brutal way, because we have eyewitness account. And 3, he raised from the dead, because we have eyewitness account. We have Peter and John and Mary, who are all at the tomb, who said it was empty. And nobody moved it. You're not going to move that sucker. One, that rock is huge that they put in front of it. It was sealed, and anybody who broke that seal would be killed by the king. No one's going to move it. People came and they stole his body and they hid it. Well, then where is it? It was never found. You're kind of trying to tell me that they wouldn't have found it. I'm pretty sure an investigation went out looking for this and it was never found. There would have been all this blood. You wouldn't have been able to stop all that blood even after he died of pooling places and seeing where it's drugged to find, oh, look, we found him over here. He was not found because he's in heaven. He rose again. He got up out of that grave. Well, I don't believe that. You don't have to. That's what happened. God doesn't force us to believe things. He asks us to believe it. But yet, hold on. Some of you will say you don't believe in that, but you'll lie to your children or you'll lie to your grandchildren about Santa Claus and ask them to believe in it. Believing in something means you believe in it. And I believe that Jesus is God's son. 1. 2, that he was whipped with a brutal whipping, and he was crucified on the cross with a very, very terrible death. And 3, that he rose again, and he's sitting on the right hand of God as my Savior. Thank you for listening. Like, follow. If this was a little graphic, oh well, it's what Christ went through, and I'm sure it was much worse than anything I could say or anything a doctor could say. Like, share, comment. Thank you, and God bless.